Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my house for over 15 years and never had any issues with my neighbors. That all changed when old Mr. Johnson moved out and his house got sold to a young couple, Brad and Stacy. From the first day they moved in, I could tell they were going to be trouble. Brad was loud, obnoxious, and had no respect for anyone else. Stacy always had a sour look on her face like she smelled something gross. They didn't even bother to introduce themselves when they moved in, just gave me dirty looks if I waved hello. Real welcoming folks. A few months after they moved in, I decided my backyard needed a new fence. The old one was falling apart in spots, so I hired a contractor to put up a nice new wood fence around the perimeter. I made sure they didn't encroach on the property line at all. The last thing I needed was a dispute with my unpleasant neighbors. The day after the new fence went up, I was drinking my morning coffee when I heard yelling coming from outside. I looked out the window to see Brad red-faced and screaming while pointing at my new fence. He was with another man who was examining the fence posts. I went outside and asked what was going on. Brad got right in my face and shouted, "You built this damn fence on my property. Who do you think you are encroaching on my land?" I tried to explain that I'd had a survey done and the fence was clearly on my property, but he wouldn't listen. He said his buddy who works for the city confirmed the fence was over the line. I told Brad I'd be happy to review the official property plot and resolve this calmly. That just made him even angrier. He called me a liar and said he was taking matters into his own hands. Before I could do anything, Brad grabbed a sledgehammer from his garage and started smashing my brand new fence. I yelled at him to stop, but he just kept pounding away at the fence, destroying several sections. His friend stood there with a stupid grin like this was entertaining. I'd had enough of this nonsense. I called the police and they arrived just as Brad took a final swing and cracked one of my fence posts in half. Thankfully, the cops witnessed Brad in the act of destroying my property, so they immediately restrained him. Brad's buddy tried telling the cops that I had built the fence encroaching on their land. The officers asked to see proof of the property line, but of course Brad's friend didn't have any official documents. Brad started cursing and threatening me, saying I'd pay for building on his property. The cops had to wrestle him into the patrol car. He put up quite a fight. With Brad taken away, I was finally able to show the remaining cop a copy of my land survey. Just as I knew the fence was well within my property line, Brad's buddy scurried off when confronted with the facts. Turns out he wasn't a city worker after all. I pressed charges against Brad for destruction of property and threatening behavior. When he got out on bail, he sent me a letter threatening to sue me for encroaching on his land. He included a hand-drawn plot with a property line that coincided with where my new fence was. I ignored his threats and sent a copy of the letter to the police. I also contacted my survey company to redo the property line analysis, just to be 100% certain. Of course, their results matched the original. My fence was on my own property, no question. At the court date, Brad showed up with his scrawled plot and demanded I pay for a fence installed on his rightful property. The judge took one look at his so-called evidence compared to my professional survey and gave Brad a stern warning about filing false claims. The judge ordered Brad to pay restitution for destroying my fence and also granted me a restraining order against him. As Brad was escorted out of court, he shouted obscenities at me, saying I hadn't heard the last of him. What a charmer. After I got my new fence rebuilt and reinforced, Brad's revenge came in the form of constantly trashing my yard. Empty beer cans and trash would be thrown over my fence constantly. He also let his dog run loose to do its business on my lawn. Instead of stooping to his level, I decided to fight back legally. I installed security cameras and captured Brad's antics on video. I called the police and showed them evidence of the harassment and vandalism. They confronted Brad, but of course he denied everything. I kept contacting the police whenever Brad pulled his stunts and made sure to get it on video. After a month of this, the authorities had seen enough. Brad was arrested for violating the restraining order and harassment. At the court date, I presented the footage of Brad's actions. Despite his lawyer's pathetic attempts to defend him, Brad was sentenced to 30 days in jail. The judge also extended the restraining order indefinitely. Brad learned his lesson the hard way. When he got out of jail, he avoided me like the plague. Stacy ended up divorcing him not long after. She actually sincerely apologized to me for everything Brad had done. We're on decent terms now, and she's nothing like her ex. She's also considering moving away to fully disconnect from him. I can finally enjoy my property in peace thanks to the cameras and the law being on my side. My advice is, don't escalate conflicts with crazy neighbors. Let the authorities and the justice system handle it properly. In the end, the high road will always win over petty revenge. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Background information. We live in an old large manor that has been divided into 3 attached houses. These houses are approximately 150 years old and were built around 5 massive giant sequoias, which are about 200 years old. In the UK, giant sequoias are very rare, and the 2 in our garden increase the house price by about £60,000. We have 2 wonderful neighbors, a young couple and an elderly couple. The story: sadly, our elderly neighbors passed away, and their child, along with her family, moved in. We'll refer to her as Joe. Joe quickly became a nuisance. We had been sharing chickens with the previous neighbors, and Joe agreed to continue sharing them. However, on her designated nights, she would often forget to secure them, so we found ourselves checking on them every night. One evening, her mischievous children decided to open our private duck pen, leading to a tragic loss. Later on, our chickens suffered a similar fate. About 2 years ago, a storm caused one of Joe's sequoias to fall and perish. They were understandably upset, but this incident seemed to ignite her envy. She would frequently lament about our fortune of having 2 sequoias in our garden and claimed that our tree cast too much shade on her property, which it didn't. We dismissed these complaints as typical Joe behavior. She occasionally made veiled threats about cutting our tree or hoping a storm would do the job. Our shock was palpable when we returned from a holiday in France to discover a massive 6-meter stump in place of our 150 tree. In the process, 2 of our cherished British oak trees had been destroyed. My mother and sisters were devastated, my father was furious, and we had no proof that Joe was responsible. She argued that a storm had necessitated the tree's removal. Although we had a security camera at the front, the back of our property was accessible through several fields. To add insult to injury, Joe presented us with an £8,000 bill for damages to her property and the tree removal costs. The wood from our tree alone would have fetched a considerable sum. Just when we were losing hope, my father made a discovery. A few months prior, we had installed a wildlife camera, which had captured everything. We immediately contacted a lawyer. A tree expert confirmed that our tree was a unique specimen, one of the few brought to the UK in 1860. Of the original 218 in the UK, only 60 remain. He also advised us to check the foundations of our house, as the rotting roots could cause significant damage. As feared, our foundations needed extensive repairs. We took legal action against Joe, suing for property damage, trespassing, and other minor offenses. The total damages amounted to approximately £500,000. Joe and her family had to relocate. With the settlement, we cleared our mortgage, renovated our home, and landscaped our garden. We also planted a 60-year-old sequoia and crafted our kitchen counter and table from the wood of the fallen tree. Now we have delightful new neighbors with whom we share chickens, ducks, and pygmy goats. They are a joy to be around, and I earn a good amount babysitting their children. The next one is a petty revenge story. After living in a condo for a long time, I finally bought my first fixer-upper house. It has a spacious backyard, and since I have a dog, I wanted to install a fence. This would allow me to let the dog out without worrying about her becoming an appetizer for the alligators in the canal behind the house. I had a survey done and hired a fence company. We chose a PVC privacy fence for the front with locking gates. The sides are bordered by my neighbor's fences, and we opted for PVC chain link in the back. In this area, it's common for neighbors to share fence lines. The fence company installed the fence according to regulations, ensuring the privacy fence was 5 feet back from the front of my house. When I went to inspect the progress, before I could even exit my car, my neighbor to the right, Karen, started knocking on my window. She was upset because the new privacy fence blocked access to a side gate next to her pool. Since I wasn't living in the house yet due to ongoing renovations, I hadn't noticed her side gate. Karen threatened to report the issue to the city. Surprised by her reaction and wanting to maintain good relations, I organized a meeting with myself, my general contractor, the fence contractor, and Karen. However, Karen declined and sent her husband Dick in her place. Dick was insistent on using the side gate, even after we explained that my fence was built to code and that it would be a liability for me if his pool and lawn maintenance crews trespassed on my property. I proposed sharing the cost to relocate his gate to the front of his house, but Dick demanded that I cover all expenses, including any landscaping. While I wanted to be accommodating, there are limits. We recently had our final fence inspection by the city, which we passed. The inspector observed that their back fence was too close to the canal and took several photos, which might lead to issues for them. So, in a small act of revenge, I locked my side privacy gate and planned to plant hedges in front of their side gate. I'm curious to see if the city will require them to reposition their back fence. The next one is a malicious compliance story. To begin, I want to clarify that I won't disclose real names or the name of the company. They have treated me exceptionally well, both in terms of salary and support for my mental well-being. I joined the company almost 2 years ago. Initially, I was just an assistant, working long hours doing manual labor. I helped maintain the pace in our receiving department alongside a great group of guys. We became close friends. Our tasks mainly involved driving forklifts and lifting heavy items into storage bins and crates. The work was straightforward but physically demanding. 3 months in, I was called into a meeting with my boss, his superior, and the boss above him. They inquired if I was interested in expanding my skill set and advancing within the company. Recognizing this as an opportunity for growth and a potential salary increase, I eagerly accepted. Within the next 2 months, I was trained on every lift and machine we operated. A month later, they offered me a promotion with a significant pay raise. Another month went by, and I was transferred from my initial department to another that was less physically demanding but required a faster work pace. I gave it my all, working long hours to express my gratitude for the opportunity. Under my leadership, the department consistently met its targets, which didn't go unnoticed. My superiors were visibly pleased with my performance. Within a few weeks, they offered me another promotion with an even higher pay grade. Fast forward to my current position. Initially, I struggled to keep up with the demands and pace. However, after a couple of months, I found my groove, clearing all my tasks and even assisting other departments. This efficiency lasted for about 4 months, making my job increasingly manageable. Presently, all my predecessors in this role have either resigned or been dismissed. No one in my department, let alone the entire building, understands the intricacies of my job. Despite my repeated request to train someone as a backup for when I'm on leave, my pleas have been ignored. My previous boss left for a better opportunity, and his replacement, unfamiliar with our industry, seems oblivious to the workflow and departmental needs. Last Thursday, after completing over 40 hours of work for the week, the new boss announced mandatory work for the following day. Although it wasn't a major inconvenience, I was disappointed about missing time with my family and girlfriend. On Friday, having completed my tasks, I assisted the receiving department. However, a few hours in, the boss called me into his office. He praised my work ethic but insisted that I stick to my designated role and not help in other departments. I requested this directive in writing, anticipating questions from colleagues about my inactivity. He complied, and I returned to my desk. The next day, I spent my entire shift texting family and friends, having no work tasks to complete. Predictably, the receiving department fell behind. By Tuesday, every team lead and manager was urging me to assist the overwhelmed receiving department. I simply forwarded them the email from the boss, reiterating his instructions. It's worth noting that I'll be transferring to a different department soon, which promises a better work environment and management. For the remaining 2 weeks in my current role, I intend to strictly adhere to my job description. I felt compelled to share this experience because it's both amusing and relatable. The next one is an entitled people story. Okay, so for some background, I'm 29 years old, English, and I live in Italy with my fiancé, Marco, who is 37 years old and Italian, along with our 5-month-old daughter, Willow. I moved to Italy after graduating from medical school where I met Marco. Currently, I'm a resident in one of the hospitals. My father has been a neglectful dad. He left my mom and me and has been very inconsistent. He married Tammy when I was young, and she has never liked me. She was also never able to have kids. When I gave birth, my mom's side of the family came over to visit, meet Willow, and take care of both of us. There was no word from my dad or Tammy. Then 2 weeks ago, they turned up unannounced, claiming to be in the area on holiday and wanting to meet Willow. She was getting a bit fussy, and she's both breastfed and formula fed, but since I was home, I grabbed a cover and let her latch onto me. Tammy commented that breastfeeding would have to stop soon. I was confused and asked her why. She said it couldn't be maintained when Willow is with them. I was even more confused, so I asked her what she meant. She showed me photos of a baby room and suggested that we split custody of Willow. She assured me not to worry and said she had everything set up already. I just stared at her, but she continued. She claimed that the age gap between Marco and me is unhealthy for a child to grow up with. She stated that it was obvious I needed help and she was happy to assist. She also insinuated that I was more concerned about working than staying home with my baby, so I should just let her have Willow. Of course, she wasn't able to breastfeed, so we would have to stop that now. I told her she couldn't be serious, and that I didn't think she expected me to give her my baby. She told me to calm down and clarified that she wasn't asking for full custody. She suggested that she could provide a calmer and more stable home, and I could always visit. She said she deserved it. Marco ushered everyone out and made sure Willow and I were all right. Since then, I've been feeling really uneasy. I've also been receiving texts from my father, saying I need to let Tammy prove herself as a good caregiver. Meanwhile, Tammy has been sending loads of photos of the nursery she has set up. Just to clarify, so there's no confusion, I'm in Italy, but Tammy is not. They flew over here. The next one is an entitled parent story. I went out on a Friday for a few hours with some friends, just for some shopping and catching up. I haven't seen some of them for the last 2 years due to COVID when we used to hang out almost every week. And I'm leaving the country in a few weeks, so we took this opportunity for a catch-up and farewell party. I was out from late afternoon until about 9/10 p.m. when I got home. I took out my keys to unlock the gate, but it wouldn't fit. I tried to turn the key around. Yes, like a USB, thinking it might fit the other way, but it still couldn't fit. I called my mother. She didn't pick up. I called my grandmother, who lives with me, but she was out with her friends as well and wouldn't be home anytime soon. At this point, I was upset. My mother had already burnt a couple of my work pants the day before because I refused to wear a dress for work. My line of work requires me to move around a lot, so a dress or office skirt was not suitable for my environment. I shook the gate, but no one was home, so I picked the lock. I managed to open the metal gate after a few tries. Luckily, the wooden door behind it was not locked. The neighbors did call the police. And of course, I had to show them that I actually lived there, and it was my legal address. I grabbed some essentials and went to stay at my friend's house for the night because I couldn't lock the door back, and I didn't feel safe in the house without a locked door. The next day, my grandmother and I were invited to a pre-wedding event. It was kind of a meeting with the elders and an engagement party, ceremony at a cafe. My mother only sent me this address and time for it. It was perfectly normal for my grandmother to be invited to these things via my mother. My grandmother doesn't know how to use a phone other than basic functions like calling. We showed up on time at the cafe and were escorted to a booth-type seat at the corner of the cafe. The booth already had a lady, mid-40s to 50s, and a guy. I assumed she was the mother and the guy was her son. The moment we sat down, the lady took out a calendar and notepads filled with lists of flower arrangements, color schemes, menus, dresses, hairstyles, and so on. She introduced her son, who is 28 by the way, told me what he does for a living, what he studies, and where. She thanked me for agreeing to marry him. I looked at her, then at her son, and then at the wedding planners and notes. It finally registered that this was for my wedding. My grandmother was quite angry, to say the least. I apologized to the lady and explained that there must be some kind of misunderstanding because I came to attend someone's engagement party, not plan my own. I also added that I was only 20 this year. My grandmother then rudely asked why she thought that I would be marrying her son. The lady replied that her mother contacted me and said her daughter was looking for a partner and husband to settle down so she, referring to me, could move out. My grandmother calmly told the lady that she had been lied to and I was not going to be getting married anytime soon. She said her son seems nice, and she hopes he finds someone who likes him to marry in the future, but it's not going to be me. We got up and left. When we got home, I found my things stuffed in a black plastic bag beside the door. My grandmother opened the door and told me to bring my stuff in. The moment I stepped through the door, my mother yelled that she put so much effort into finding a guy who would take a girl like me to marry. and that I should be grateful she didn't just marry me off to an older dude. She said I should be happy she found someone my age. She told me I embarrassed her because the mother called her and told her that what she did was not okay, and to not do it again without even asking or informing me properly. My grandmother started to shout at my mother in Cantonese, which resulted in them having a heated argument for almost 30 minutes, and my grandmother kicked my mother out. Of course, she complained and cried about it before leaving. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.